Hello, I'm Chuck Smith.
And I'm Carol Matriciana. Welcome to another edition of The Pagan Invasion.
Today, an obvious shift in the religious inclination of Western culture is seen in the fashionable embrace of popular paganism and Eastern mysticism. Until recently, the foundational establishment of North America and Europe was proud to further such biblical concepts as faith in a divine supernatural being, his intervention in creation, and his standards of truth as seen in divine laws of morality. Today, these principles have been replaced with belief in mythology of pagan gods and goddesses, evolution, and shifting values. Prestigious traditional establishments like the Boy Scouts of America, the Girl Scouts, YWCAs, and the YMCAs have included a potpourri of New Age paganism into their programs. Instead of pursuing their original Christian goals, they now endorse Buddhist and Hindu rituals such as Tai Chi and yoga.
The promise of power is at the core of paganism, shamanism, witchcraft, the New Age, and Eastern mysticism. It has been seductively packaged as human potential and mind science across the nation, from classrooms to corporate businesses. Motivational gurus are being hired by America's corporate giants to stimulate self-realization and teach their employees Eastern occultic meditation techniques. While virtually no evidence verifies increase in productivity or performance, companies such as TRW, Ford Motor Company, Procter & Gamble, Polaroid, Hewlett-Packard, AT&T, IBM, Coca-Cola, to name but a few, continue to require their employees to participate in occult mental alchemy and Eastern religious transformation. Pacific Bell, California's largest utility company, requires its 65,000 employees to learn mind-altering meditations as part of their employee training program. Most prominent bookstores now carry rapidly growing and financially lucrative New Age sections. These books introduce their oftentimes naive readers to occultism, shamanism, and other pagan practices. Mental health professionals have found it necessary to organize spiritual emergency support groups to help those overwhelmed by dangerous occultic encounters. They warn that parapsychological techniques such as hypnosis, visualization, contact with inner guides, and regression into past lives can have bizarre and dangerous results.
The Psychosynthesis Institute states that the use of the imagination is one of the most rapidly spreading new trends in psychology and education. Surprisingly, this powerful form of primitive occultism has even infiltrated today's mainline churches. Promoted under the guise of Christian psychology, creative visualization is often practiced and falsely presented as a biblically acceptable technique. Is there an organization behind the promotion of this new awakening of the divine consciousness? Many experts believe that the Hindu Vishva Parishad, an Indian missionary organization made up of celebrated Hindu religious leaders, is one of the main motivational thrusts behind today's aggressive pagan evangelism to the West. We begin our report in India, the headquarters of Hindu Vishva Parishad.
Once a religion for Indians alone, Hinduism has become radically evangelistic through adopting the principles of Christian missionaries who introduced cultural and social reforms in India. In 1966, at an international Hindu conference, leading Hindus planned a strategy to convert the world. The gurus were chosen as the first crusaders, and their tens of millions of converts are now the first Western Hindus. the World Congress of Hinduism in 1979, a spokesman declared that our mission in the West has been crowned with fantastic success. Hinduism is becoming the dominant world religion, and the end of Christianity has come near. At the 1981 TM conference in India, a spokesman stated that the entire mission of TM is to counter the ever-spreading demon of Christianity.
Behind today's aggressive campaign for world Hindu domination is a secretive organization called the Vishva Hindu Parishad. It is the world missionary organization of Hinduism. Paragraph 4 of its constitution says that its aim is to establish an order of missionaries, both lay and initiate, the purpose of propagating dynamic Hinduism. The Hindu Vishva Parishad magazine clearly states that yoga teachers throughout the world are the front missionaries of the Hindu religion. Western teachers themselves may not realize that they are being used by India's Hindu leaders in this way, but they are.
While a guru-disciple, Prema Nayak was an accomplished yoga teacher for 10 years.
Yoga teachers are blind leading the blind. They themselves do not understand what they're into. They don't have any idea what they're teaching. This is really being used to reach the souls of students and innocent people in this country and other countries who come for an exercise class.
As I look back on it, I see it was a subtle infiltrating of my beliefs and ideas. It totally changed my worldview. It gave me little or no moral standards by which to guide my life.
I was becoming a Hindu, and it was a very big deception.
The Vishva Hindu Parishad's plot to convert the world to Hinduism has created thousands of New Age worldwide networks with tens of millions of converts, all working for a new one-world government.
Through the repackaging of yoga, the Western mind is being systematically conditioned to accept a neo-pagan worldview. Combined with New Age thinking, it claims to offer more integrity, selflessness, goodwill, freedom, and says it is the very alternative to Christianity's narrow way.
Yoga is really part of our society now. It's being sold everywhere as technique for relaxation, for becoming unstressed, brighter, more beautiful.
The self-centered world of glamour promotes yoga, meditation, and visualization techniques as a means to a healthier and more beautiful body, mind, and spirit. Spirituality is in, but with an anti-biblical meaning. Even relaxation has become a spiritual quest for one's so-called full potential through holistic massage, isolation tanks, and hundreds of other New Age techniques. Most of the 2,000 YMCAs across America offer yoga classes. And nearly 2/3 of all universities and colleges make yoga available as part of the curriculum.
Many of the people practicing yoga that I have met say to me that they only practice it because of the physical benefits. Any Hindu would tell you, however, that there is no yoga that is purely physical.
One of the first things I learned in my teacher's training class was that I must talk to the students about the philosophy behind yoga, that this was just as important as the exercises. I will count. Relaxation at the end of yoga class is really hypnosis, where each part of the body is relaxed. So while they were in this state, I read to them about the Hindu philosophy or something from one of my guru's books, so they got it whether they wanted it or not.
Yoga exercises were not designed for physical fitness, but to realign the serpent force within the body, to achieve godhood, that yoking, which is what yoga means, with Brahman. Anyone interested in physical fitness ought to do exercises designed for that, not yoga.
Many hospitals have set up their own yoga and meditation classes to provide stress reduction for patients, doctors, and nurses. Doctors and dentists who wouldn't think of promoting Christianity or Judaism on the grounds that it is religious are unwittingly involving their patients in Hindu practices.
The last 2 years I've been working with some German doctors. That was in research of breathing exercises. In our Danish school, we get patients from the doctors, typical with backache, with nervous symptoms, with high blood pressure, with stress, and so on.
Appearing in the film Gods of the New Age is Dave Hunt, an internationally recognized cult expert and best-selling author of more than a dozen books dealing with Eastern mysticism, psychic phenomenon, cults, and the occult. I recently asked him to share his thoughts concerning the spiritual seduction of the West by the East. Dave, could you explain what the Vishva Hindu Parishad is?
It's, I would say, the largest missionary organization in the world, whereas the Hindus will not allow, you can't go as a missionary to India, but they send their missionaries all over the world, denying that they're missionaries. And Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, for example, he comes sent by his guru to convert the world to Hinduism. He says it's not religion, it's scientific. It would be like the Pope running around the world saying that instead of representing a church, he represents a group of scientists, you know, headquartered in Rome. That's what these men are doing.
Dave, what are some of the conditioning processes that prepared today's society to accept the pagan invasion?
I think a disillusionment with materialism, an emptiness within, which is there, the God-shaped vacuum. Unfortunately, they weren't willing to accept it from the Bible, from the Word of God. They were turned off on Christianity, and they turned somewhere else. Just at that point in our society came the drug movement, the psychedelic drugs in particular, which flipped them into this state of consciousness where they made contact with a whole realm of the spirit that they didn't believe existed. And now this became the real world to them. And in fact, it opened the door for the gurus to come from the East with the next step. I talk to parents all the time who say, well, you know, my son was, or my daughter was on drugs, but now they're into yoga, and I don't understand this yoga thing, but thank God at least they're off of drugs. And I say, I'm sorry to tell you, drugs was the kindergarten. Yoga is the graduate school. That's the hard stuff. They can get a lot higher on yoga than they did on drugs, but there is an intimate connection. It's called, there are two words in Greek that are translated sorcery in the New Testament. One of them is magia, you develop magic powers. The other one is pharmakia, pharmacus, from which drugs come. A sorcerer is a person who takes consciousness-altering drugs in order to contact spirit beings to gain supernatural powers. So our society was conditioned in this way. Then along came the Beatles and others like them, who through their music seduced our youth further into drugs. Some of the rock stars called themselves shamans, witch doctors. And through this beat, they get into this state and so forth. So our society has been conditioned in many ways to embrace this. And then, of course, the human potential movement, the idea that we have the power within. If we only get into an altered state where we can tap in, learn techniques for tapping this power. So our society has been ripened. We're just ripe for this pagan invasion.
Can you explain the difference between biblical counseling and psychology?
Well, biblical counseling is based upon the Bible. You counsel someone from the Bible. And the Bible is complete in itself. It claims to have all the answers that we need from a spiritual standpoint. It doesn't offer us mechanical answers for our automobile or medical answers, but it does offer spiritual answers. Now, psychology, Carl Jung said psychology is the study of the psyche, the psyche, the soul. And he said we don't know what the soul is. So it's another religion. It's an attempt to deal with the spiritual side of man from a humanistic standpoint. It does have its roots in the pagan world, in Eastern mysticism. For example, you can very easily see the connection between Freud's two major theories, the unconscious mind and psychic determinism, that what we are today is caused by the prior experiences of, our childhood. That's what reincarnation teaches. That what's happening to me today, what I am today, is the result of my prior experiences been in a prior life. Very close relationship. So it's only natural then that many psychologists and psychiatrists not only regress you into your childhood, but they now take you right on through the womb into past lives, into reincarnation therapy. The whole idea is to manipulate reality. Now, the difference between that and what the Bible teaches, you're going to have to redefine the Bible. Eve rebelled against God, brought a lot of problems into her life. Well, obviously, the reason she did it was because she was abused as a child. She was raised in a broken home, in a terrible environment. It was her childhood experiences, Not so. Or Satan, who rebelled against God in Isaiah 14. His problem was he had a bad self-image, low self-esteem. Not so. So I would suggest that if anyone has a solution to human behavior and the evil that comes into our lives and the frustration and the unhappiness and the fears and so forth that doesn't fit the case of Satan or it doesn't fit the case of Eve, who was raised in a paradise, they don't have the right solution. And unfortunately, Christians today are embracing something that they add to the Bible that comes out of Eastern mysticism, it comes out of paganism, it comes out of the occult. It comes from godless anti-Christians, and they're now somehow joining Freud with Christ, Carl Rogers and Maslow and so forth, for a new kind of therapy, a new kind of counseling that mixes the Bible in with humanistic psychology.
Many doctors and nurses today are obliged to pursue folklore and shaman medical techniques labeled as scientific. In Britain, government-financed national health doctors advocate the practice of transcendental meditation instead of conventional medicine.
Thousands of MDs, PhDs, chiropractors, and dentists are enthusiastic proponents of New Age holistic medicine. These New Age practitioners operate from the premise that treatment of the body must begin with treatment of the mind and spirit. These therapies involve countless techniques, most of which incorporate altering one's consciousness, or hypnosis.
Always part of the occult, hypnosis has become the main bridge between Hinduism and modern science. Hypnosis creates the same states of consciousness that you experience under drugs and in yoga. Accepted in medicine and psychiatry, hypnosis is the heart of self-improvement and positive mental attitude courses. And hundreds of misinformed Christian psychologists use hypnosis in their daily counseling.
Many believe that hypnosis is okay if used by qualified counselors. Somehow used by the right people makes it scientific and not occultic.
In pursuit of Freudian myths, psychiatrists use hypnosis to regress patients back into their childhood and into the womb where they relive the traumas of their birth, despite the scientific fact that the prenatal, natal, and early postnatal brain is not sufficiently developed to carry memories.
I did indeed experience my original birth thought, but I felt it wasn't enough. I went back and I experienced my thought during my conception, and then I went back from there to a previous lifetime to experience why I had structured my conception the way I did. I mean, it's never ending. You can just keep going.
Moreover, they take them right back into prior lives where they come out with factual recountings of lives they've lived all over this earth. Obviously, the memory is not coming from the brain. It's coming from a deceptive source.
The field of medicine is embracing numerous New Age beliefs that cannot be explained scientifically, such as acupuncture, which claims to manipulate the Kundalini force with needles, and biofeedback, which uses a monitoring device to train a person to control ordinarily involuntary functions, such as blood pressure.
The Menninger Clinic's documentary on biofeedback calls it the yoga of the West. Elmer and Alice Green, pioneer biofeedback researchers, admit that it creates the same state of consciousness and results as yoga.
This electronic yoga has now been introduced by psychologists into the world of sports, including the Olympics.
Businessmen are coming to yoga today because they want to be relaxed in the middle of their day. They want to train their ability to concentrate.
Self-help therapies are a motivational tool used by hundreds of competitive businesses across America. Weekend success and positive mental attitude seminars and mail-order subliminal persuasion cassettes promise to improve personal and business performance through a blend of humanistic psychology and Eastern mysticism. One such course, called New Age Thinking for Developing Your Full Potential, has changed thousands of lives for such prestigious clients as the IRS, CIA, U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force, NASA, General Motors, IBM, Xerox, Rockwell International, Bell Telephone System, Bank of America, and scores of police and fire departments.
The human potential movement, with its emphasis upon self, self-esteem, self-love, self-acceptance, a positive self-image, is simply a westernized version of the yogi's self-realization, the guru's concept of the divine within, that we're all God. Rolling Thunder, the Shoshone Indian medicine man, has said, scientists will eventually discover what pagans have always known. That's exactly what's happening through the invasion of Eastern mysticism into the West.
Many leading scientists have enthusiastically embraced Eastern mysticism in recent years. Hinduism, which claims to be the oldest religion, is being deceptively packaged as the new science.
And a lot of the East is very seductively packaged. It's put over very carefully so that they don't stress the religious side, they'll put the scientific. They don't stress the spiritual side, they'll put the physical fitness or whatever.
The yoga we teach has nothing to do with religion. It is scientific methods in the way that you do something and then you get results.
Maharishi found out that in the United States that people would not buy the religion package. So offered the scientific package, started getting scientists involved, started to do experiments on meditators such as the breath rate, the brainwave patterns, etc. And when they found out that the metabolic rates lowered during meditation, they found they could present it scientifically and people would buy it better that way.
Even as teachers, we were taught the puja ceremony. We were bowing down to Hindu gods, and yet we didn't really feel we were teaching a religion.
I think that's extremely deceptive and dishonest, because the deeper you get into it, for instance, as people are initiated and so on, what they're taught is the pujas and the basic words and the rituals that are Hindu worship. Of course, many Englishmen and Americans don't realize what the words mean, but if they just asked what the Sanskrit meant, they'd realize that's fundamentally religious, and the whole thing is basically, in that sense, dishonest.
Children practice it. It is used for teaching languages. It is used for the businessmen, for all levels of society. It's taught in the schools.
In schools across the Western world, from kindergarten through university, Hindu occultism is being openly taught in spite of the otherwise enforced separation between church and state.
Guru Thakur Singh was invited to speak at a high school in Southern California. Kurt, a student there, became so overwhelmed that he actually moved to India, where he is now a devoted follower of Thakur.
It's only half an hour talk and 20 minutes meditation. And the experience I had while there was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And just the air, the energy in the chapel where he was speaking was just electrified with feelings of love and just a peace, a hushed quiet that was just bewildering to me.
It seems outrageous that in public schools across America, where Christian prayer has been outlawed, yoga, Eastern meditation, and visualization techniques, which are simply forms of Hindu prayer, are not only allowed, they're being actively promoted.
Here in some of the schools in the West, in the PE classes, after having started with the physical aspects of yoga, the teacher eventually has the kids chanting words like Om, Brahma, or Krishna, names of the gods.
Starting right down from the teacher to the student, we learned that the yoga could really help the kids reduce tension and center themselves.
Many teachers are now being encouraged to develop a mass consciousness among the students.
Let's relax. We're going to very slowly lift our hands up.
Children are taught to let go of their critical faculties and center in on their intuitive feelings and experiences.
Just really, really relax. Imagine that you're on top of a really soft and fluffy cloud. When you're just really relaxed, comfortable. Just see that blue sky in your mind.
Visualization is an important pagan concept and technique. This is being used by seminaries and pastors today. Can you make any comments on this?
The most powerful occult technique is visualization. Now, there's nothing wrong with visualization if I'm reading a novel and I see the scene that the novelist is painting in his rich descriptive language, or if I'm planning a house and we're visualizing the way the rooms will be laid out, or I'm seeing in my mind the vacation spot where I was last year or whatever. There's a legitimate use to visualization. But if I think that I can create reality with my mind, or that I can make contact with God by visualizing, that is called divination in the Bible. That is the fastest way to step into the occult, and all the occultists recognize it. And we are being taught in the church today to go back in the past. We're going to heal these hurts from your childhood. We'll go back in the past and visualize yourself as a child, see Jesus coming alongside of you, and so forth. Or you want to get in touch with Jesus, there are prayer techniques now, two-way dialogue with God. You visualize God, or you focus on this image, it will speak to you. There are people who get into inner healing and they visualize Jesus, and suddenly they say, it was no longer my mind in control, but this image that I have conjured up in my mind of Jesus took on its own life and began to talk to me and guide me. Now they've made contact with the spirit world. And you don't call from the right hand of the Father on high, the Son of God, as your private guru to appear before you and talk to you anytime you please. Now, if Jesus chooses to appear to someone, I'm not against visions. If Jesus appears to you, I've got nothing against that if it's really Jesus. But if you initiate this, you cause it to happen, that's called divination. And God is not going to be at your whim, and he's not going to come. Now, you could take a popular book on meditation out there, Celebration of Discipline. And in it, I think around page 15, the author, he talks about John was in the Spirit on the Lord's day at the beginning of Revelation, and then he says, could it be that John was schooled in a way of making contact that we have lost and we now need to recover? That's a technique. The idea that there's some kind of a technique, it simply is not true. Man wants to play God. Oh, sure, he says he wants God to help him, but he wants God to bless his plans. Even for many of us who call ourselves Christians, prayer is a religious technique to get our own way. We set our sights on what we want, and we spend the sweet hour of prayer trying to talk God into working it out for us. And if somebody comes along who offers a technique in how to get God to do it, get what we want, that's rebellion, really. The gospel, Jesus said, except you deny self, take up the cross and follow me, you can't be my disciple. Yoga is self-realization, human potential. This whole pagan invasion teaches me to realize my powers, the potential that I have within. And so all religion, unless it is submission to Jesus Christ as Lord, is really rebellion against God. It's trying to find a God that I can mold into my image, and a God who will bless my plans, and a God who will do what I want him to do.
Dave, can you talk about how the entertainment industry is promoting pagan ideas?
I think the most powerful medium for manipulating our thinking is films, television, and we're getting it all the time there. Films that give you the idea that you can contact the dead, very appealing, like Ghosts, the #1 moneymaker of 1990 in the United States. That when you die, you don't really die, but you move on into graduate school to continue to learn your lessons, and you can be sort of a spirit guide. I mean, you had the same idea in Star Wars. When Obi-Wan died, he became the spirit guide for Luke Skywalker and communicated with him and so forth. This is a pagan idea. It's been around for thousands of years, and it's being embraced now in the Western world. The idea that we can develop supernatural powers. Again, back to creating reality with our mind. Back to the lie of the serpent in the garden, that I can become a god on my own. Now, it's in children's cartoons. From the Smurfs to Masters of the Universe, you've got your little granddaughter running around saying, "Shira, Princess of Power." And I don't need Jesus. I've got Shira, you know. Now, in one sense, you could say, well, this sort of thing has been around forever, fairy tales and so forth. There's a big difference today. When I was a boy growing up and I read Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, it was fantasy. Today, that's no longer the attitude of our young people, for one good reason. Science fiction proved to be predictive, prophetic. The H.G. Wellses and the science fiction writers from the past were prophets. When I grew up and I read about space travel and all this kind of stuff, you know, television, etc., we laughed at it. It happened. So the kids that are watching television and seeing these science fiction films today, they look upon this as something that can be attained. Yes, we can attain it. So they are seduced into this whole world of magic in a way that I never was as a child when I grew up.
While the classrooms have become the pulpits for New Age Hindu occultism, another major source of influence is the media.
One of the ways that the consciousness of the masses can most powerfully be influenced is through the mass media, which is increasingly being used for promoting Indian consciousness.
The film Gandhi was probably the most effective piece of Indian propaganda to invade the West. It was a political advertisement controlled and heavily financed by the Indian government and promoted by the peace movement. It propagates a false message of Hindu religious tolerance and non-violence. Historical accuracy was discarded. Gandhi was no different from most gurus today in that he was a sexual pervert and was certainly not the non-violent, peace-loving man as demonstrated in his racial killings of blacks in the Kafir Wars in South Africa. The most important message of the film was that Gandhi was one of the first gurus to link Christianity and Hinduism to form one package, a new religion. I consider him to be one of the fathers of the New Age movement.
So many of the most popular films today, like Close Encounters, Poltergeist, E.T., Return of the Jedi, Star Wars, are all based upon Hinduism. For example, the Force has a dark and a light side. That's black magic and white magic. The doorway into the occult is an altered state of consciousness. This is the way that Obi-Wan initiates Luke into the Force. He has him working a laser sword. He says, Luke, your problem is you're trying to think. He puts a visor over his face so he can't see. And he says, Luke, you got to tune it out and let the Force take over. That's an altered state of consciousness. In The Empire Strikes Back, Yoda is a yogi. He's got Luke standing on his head going through various contortions to develop the mind power to raise a spaceship out of the swamp. And when Luke can't do it, Yoda does. And Luke looks on and says, I don't believe it. And Yoda says, that's your problem. In other words, it's all in the mind. If you would only believe, it would happen.
A child can understand the dark and light side of the Force. And to understand the Force is to understand basic Hinduism. George Lucas, creator of the Star Wars series, is in real life a devout believer in the Force, which he says can enable anyone to read minds, see past and future events, levitate, and plug into a nether world of psychic energy.
We are raising an entire generation of children under the bombardment of cartoons and television shows and fantasy role-playing games and movies that are telling them that the occult and Eastern philosophy is a wonderful thing, not something to be afraid of, not something ugly and fearful, but something beautiful with the darling reptilian creatures with the great psychic powers that are drawing these children into an acceptance of things that are dangerous beyond anyone's comprehension.
The minds of children are being trained in the use of the supernatural and taught the principle of creating what seems like reality through Hindu psycho-spiritual techniques of mind power. Dungeons and Dragons, for example, requires participants to mentally murder, rape, torture, and otherwise commit mayhem with the aid of occultic powers. In at least one popular game, Hindu deities like the goddess Kali are invoked. Hindu religious techniques, including repeated chants, visualization, and casting spells, are used to overcome enemies.
For you students who are new to our fantasy games class today, we're going to be playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I'd like to talk about a few of the advantages of using Dungeons and Dragons in a classroom. You may be wondering why you get to play games in school time.
These games are used in gifted children's programs throughout the United States. A clear majority of state-supported schools and colleges incorporate them into their curriculum.
And we call this an integrated curriculum. You guys are kind of familiar with that. You may encounter some violent creatures on the way, but the object is to be able to dispose of this ring that is the symbol of evil in the kingdom of Middle Earth.
As we look at the fruit of Eastern religion, we see in India the poverty that is there, the ignorance, the superstition. It seems just totally unthinkable that in our Western culture that has been so blessed because of the Christian influence, that we would leave the Christian influence and begin to embrace the religious thoughts and ideas of the East. But unfortunately and tragically, that is exactly what we see happening today. As in the church, people are being encouraged to visualize the things that they want. They are taught that by faith they can bring into reality anything they desire. And the sovereignty of God and the control of God over man has been twisted so that man becomes the sovereign and God becomes the genie that must obey the demands or the desires of man. Surely we need to get back to biblical Christianity, and we need to forsake these principles and practices that are being espoused by even church leaders, principles that go back to actually the metaphysics or to the Hindu beliefs, the think and grow rich concepts. You can have whatever you visualize, but we need to realize that God is in control of our lives, and we should want God to be in control of our lives and just submit ourselves to that which He knows best for us. Within all of us, there is a God-shaped vacuum Throughout the ages, man has attempted to fill that void with the things of the world. But it is only through a relationship with our Creator that we can be truly satisfied. His Holy Scriptures reveal the way in which we can be reconciled to God, and that is through the provisions of His Son, Jesus Christ. I'm Chuck Smith.
And I'm Carol Matriciana. Join us again for another edition of The Pagan Invasion.